Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the Temperance card. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon. Supporting me there gives you early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, and monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners. The link will be in the show notes to check that out. And you can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards I pull. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area in Washington State, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup group events, where we all bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. Maybe you'll even find a deck that you really like and can search for that particular one in the future. Our next meetup is on Monday, February 10th at 6 p.m. at Katie Downs in Tacoma. More information is in the link in the show notes for how to RSVP to that. All right, so into our main discussion. So again, welcome to season 3 of this podcast. In the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In season 2, I went through the first 13 cards of the Major Arcana, one per episode. And now we're into season 3, where I'll go through the final 9 cards in the Major Arcana and then talk about each suit. So today I'm talking about the Temperance card. We went in the last episode with going from like nearly the most famous tarot card, Death, to talking about Temperance, a card that I'd say people know less about. It's not really a word that's often used these days, at least in my sphere. And so we also can come to this card with more of like a blank slate when it comes to interpretations. All right, so the Temperance card is considered the number 14 in the Tarot Major Arcana part of the deck. So numerology associated with 14 is around communication, networking, a union of opposites, business innovation, and independence. And traits associated with 14 are being versatile, lucky, compassionate, empathetic, and adaptable. I did learn in looking up some of the associations with the number 14 that in Chinese numerology, that 14 is considered inauspicious, and that some high rises in Malaysia and Singapore change the 14th floor to 13A or 13B, which sort of sounds similar to what gets done often here in the US with hotels and the number 13. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So depictions for this card. So things that are commonly seen across tarot decks are, I'd say, like the color blue, some representation of water, sometimes like pouring between two cups, and then something that sort of describes the in-between. And again, that's sort of what the pouring from one cup to another is sort of about, but there are some other depictions of how to kind of get that across as well. So in some of the decks that I'm looking at today, so in the Sasarabito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington, they depict a person that's actually all blue in this card, and they look like they have like 2 coffee cups, and they're pouring coffee from one into the other. So again, we get like the blue, we get pouring things, and we get sort of this like in between. In the Therapist Who Tarot deck, by Drea Bloom and Rebecca Bloom. What's depicted looks like almost like an angel, I would say. It's like a person that looks like they kind of have like wings and they're up really high. And there's a lot of blue of different colors in this. Yeah, so that's kind of what comes across there. And the word associated with this card on this deck is protection. And then in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, there's a lot going on in this card. There's a person or goddess of some kind. They have like praying hands. They're standing up and sort of bathed in like a gold fur coat is kind of what it looks like. There's roses throughout that are red and gold as well. There's sort of like a bunch of snakes wrapped up at the bottom, like at their feet, like a multiple different kinds. And there's a bunch of more red objects, like almost look like diamonds or rubies or stones that are all red. And then there's like two goblets at the top of the card that are sort of pouring water from one to the other. Although, if they were really pouring it this way, the water would fall out. So it's sort of like almost like a rainbow of water above the person. So that's some of the depictions that I see here. If I get into more of the meanings for this card, right, again, like temperance isn't a word I use very often, so I don't necessarily come into it with a lot of like prior knowledge. So I'm going to be referencing from the Library of Esoterica tarot book by Taschen. So they talk about temperance as being the center of the storm or an in between state of things. It's neither one or the other. And sometimes it talks about this card sort of like walking along the edges. It says in traditional depictions, the temperance angel is neither female nor male. The angel comes to us to bring a softening to our hard ridges. They show us that things cannot be so simply organized as we think. So again, it's sort of this like in between state. Like they said, it often features like a winged angel that sort of looks genderless, balanced between masculine and feminine and able to move between both worlds. It says often one foot is immersed in water, the symbol for the unconscious or the subconscious, and the others on dry land. So more in the material realm. There's often like blue, that maybe they're wearing blue or a blue robe, um, and that kind of thing. And that is sort of indicating this like balance of earth and natural law. They often are holding chalices, like I said, or kind of like goblets with water flowing between, representing a connection of the super and subconscious minds. And again, that sort of means like if you're in your normal state of mind, you have the subconscious, which would be maybe like when you're dreaming or sort of like not paying attention. And then you have like the super conscious, which would be like the idea of like your higher self or like sort of like the self you aspire to be. And so they're saying that this sort of indicates that in between time. Temperance is able to move fluidly like the water between, signifying balance, harmony, and the union of opposites. So yeah, very interesting, and again, sort of different ways to depict this. So sort of attributes, and again, to get into more of the meanings of this card, it's about balance and moderation, harmony through equilibrium. Temperance asks for patience and points to the need for both a stable personal foundation and an openness to collaboration and community. And again, I sort of think of that as that what they were talking about with like one foot in the water and one on land, like sort of having the part of you that's very present and has a stable foundation and sort of maybe again knows what you want and is doing things to get there. And then you have this foot in the subconscious or in this sort of more fluid realm where maybe you're still more adaptable, right? You're able to go with the flow. Again, we have all these phrases associated with water. And that's a lot of what this card is about. It says temperance is also the calm at the center of the storm. So again, that's sort of like in between state. If you think of like I guess like hurricane sort of, or like the eye of the storm is often like calm, but then like all of the things around it are very sort of like haphazard or like moving very rapidly. So it's sort of that like small space in the middle there. In the Sassurabito tarot deck, the Temperance card talks about is a card of balance and the middle way, harmony, moderation, equilibrium, and health. the joining of forces and bringing together of extremes. It's the card of recovery, security, and well-being. This card commonly shows an angel that sort of is this like in between genders, a balance showing there, and pouring liquid from one vessel to another. Sometimes water into wine, sometimes cold water into hot. This is a blending or synthesis of opposites. So I have another Rumi quote associated with this card, and it says, "Your hand opens and closes, opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two is beautifully balanced and coordinated as birds' wings." Which is also interesting considering that this is often depicted as an angel. That also has wings like birds. And that's sort of, right, like birds can have their wings tucked or they can have them, right, rapidly going up and down, but there's also a lot of birds that have their wings like taut and then they can glide that way. So I sort of view this as like, this is the gliding that they're doing. This is that sort of in between state here. So with the Therapist Who Tarot deck, there's not a deck guidebook that goes with this deck. Like I said, there's a word associated with each card. So this one is protection, which again, if we think of angels, that's often like in biblical ways or even not, that angels are depicted as protectors or sort of looking out for people. So the questions on the back of this card are, what is your favorite book? What is something you would like to master? And what in your life is a non-negotiable? Which again, we sort of have like this tension between, right, like what's non-negotiable in your life? What are you pushing for and trying to master? And also like what is, like what are you, like what's your favorite book, right? What do you associate with, or what is something that right, is really impactful to you? And maybe it's not just that the book is all good, but maybe, right, you can see yourself in parts of the book. Or maybe you learned something from that book and that's why it's your favorite, or a thing that you like to go back to. And then for the last card I'm going to be talking about today, this is in the Goddess of Love tarot deck. And Gabriella Herstick usually depicts different goddesses. Like I said, it's called the Goddess of Love tarot deck. So that's sort of the name of the game there. So I'm going to look at what goddess she's depicting in this one. Oh, let's see. So the goddess for this one is Mary Magdalene, and the astrological correspondence is Sagittarius. And if you think of Sagittarius, the zodiac sign, I think it's usually like it's depicted like a bow and arrow, which again has like tension and sort of like an in between state of, right, like you're pulling back on the arrow and it's going to shoot and it's going to go somewhere, but it's not, you're in that in between state. Like it hasn't gone anywhere yet, it hasn't left, it's still here, but like it's a movement of action. And Sagittariuses are often associated with like travel or again, moving between spaces, having maybe like energy or an active person or card and sort of not liking to sit still. Okay, so under this card, it talks about we're here to find balance between heart and mind, spirit and flesh, sex and love. This isn't about disconnecting from reality, but rather integrating dualities through unconditional love. Temperance offers the balance of one foot on the terrestrial and one in the celestial, a balance of force and form as embodied by Mary Magdalene. So again, it sort of has this like one foot on earth or one foot on the land and one sort of in this way in the stars or in the celestial, but that in between state again. And it talks about that Mary, which was Jesus's most beloved disciple, and embodies the energy of temperance in her commitment to love, sacred sexuality, and her beloved. She represents gnosis, the realization of divinity through the self, heart, and communion with the divine. Surrender to the tides of life by aligning with the mysteries of the universe. So again, we get sort of like a water metaphor, the tides of life. So temperance invites in balance and grounding, right? Again, like you have the grounding of one foot on the earth or on the steady ground. And then you also, right, again, if you were literally had one foot on the ground and one in the water, you would have to balance, right? You would have to sort of, like maybe you're sinking into the sand, right, in the water or something like that. Like you would have to find the equilibrium between the two spaces. So it says, find a middle ground between the two opposing energies, forces, choices, or beliefs with this alchemical key that transmutes any blocks, forces, and patterns into wisdom, faith, and guidance. Make the mundane world part of your spiritual practice. Temperance also reveals the equilibrium between truth and perception, love and lust. It's the secret key of sex magic, or the use of sexual energy to transform in the esoteric realm, and the potency of sexual secretions in the exoteric realm. Temperance can be thought of as the lunar and solar qualities of the self uniting in the act of sacred sex, when two opposing forces come together through the flesh in search of something greater. Which again just makes me think of the phrase like that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. All right. And for the journal question associated with this one, or the affirmation, says, I embrace my divine dualities and am grounded in the love that results from the sacred alchemy. Where am I being asked to find balance between sex and spirit, love and lust, mind and spirit? So again, what's kind of focusing on that in-between state there and kind of some of the benefits of that. The last thing I'm going to chat about is Elliot Adams' book, Fearless Tarot, How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation. We're going to look at the Temperance card in there. So they really talk about that temperance is all about finding the right recipe for balanced living. That's about moderation and slowing down. Maybe it represents your inner stress barometer, which notifies you when your mind and body are under too much strain. Right? Again, if you sort of think of like a push and pull or tension, or again, the sort of like what happens when the water is in between two cups, right? Again, if you had too much stress and not enough capacity, right? You're going to maybe have way too much water in your stress cup that you're pouring into your capacity cup, and that cup is going to run over, and not so in a great way. When temperance appears, it's time to give your body more of what it needs right now in order to restore your equilibrium. So it sounds like this card really for them is all about, again, finding that harmony in between, like what happens when you're too stressed, like how does your body show you those things? Do you get strange sensations that make you worry you might have something wrong with you? Or are you able to listen to your inner needs when you're spread too thin, right? Oftentimes, again, in our capitalistic society, there's a lot of things that are told that are required of us. There's a lot of things we have to do day to day. There's feeding ourselves, there's going to work, there's paying for things, there's filing taxes, there's, trying to do all the other fun things in between taking care of yourself, loving people, having relationships, right? And sometimes it feels like there's too much to do. And like that your cup, right? Sometimes it feels like that again, that stress cup is a lot more full than your capacity cup. And so we have to think about, where are you spreading yourself too thin? What happens when you power through, right? That sometimes maybe that feels worth it, right? That okay, I'm going to power through maybe before a vacation or something. Again, I don't think this is like the ideal, but right, again, it's a choice you can make. But then sometimes, right, we get on vacation and then, now we're sick because our body, right, is maybe showing us that, oh, okay, right, you went beyond capacity, and right, we can handle that for a little bit, but now that you're in this more safe space, or now that you're allowed your body and your immune system, or your nervous system to be a little bit more stable, now your body thinks, right, this is the right time to get sick because you finally have capacity to deal with it and actually feel it. And you're no longer in like the emergency stress situation. And so again, right, that's not really our ideal, right? Is to go on vacation and immediately get sick, or go home from the holidays and immediately get sick. It's not very fun, but sometimes, right, that's what happens when it feels like we're spread too thin, and sometimes we make the choice to power through, or it feels like that choice is made for us, right? Again, with work, school obligations. Um, Again, this book talks about the kind of feet in between two pieces, the dry land and the stream. It says if you follow the angel's example and look after your equilibrium, you'll also find a healthier, happier future awaiting you. Temperance is sandwiched between the Major Arcana's most challenging cards, the Hanged Man and Death, and the Devil and the Tower. So, right, our last two episodes were on the Hanged One and Death. And then after Temperance come the Devil and the Tower. So, right, this is also a card of in between these kind of major things. It's an oasis in the leg of the journey. Temperance represents a place of self-care and restoration before getting back in the ring. The many angels that appear in the tarot represent your higher self. The location of Temperance in the Major Arcana symbolizes the need to reconnect with the transcendent big picture perspective while amid difficulties. Stressful situations can deplete you quickly. It's like holding your breath underwater and endlessly swimming. The symbol of temperance can be described as returning to the water's surface and replenishing yourself with fresh breath of sweet air. Temperance enables you to go within and return to the surface renewed and revitalized. So again, we're sort of thinking about, right, how do we find balance in our life? How do we, right, not just have, okay, I have to work and then I can play. Because again, sometimes that means that by the time we get to play, our body's sort of done for, and then our playtime becomes, okay, now I have to recover during this time, right? Maybe I pushed myself too far. And again, like that's probably not our ideal version of play, is sort of being forced to care for our body, right? Being forced to slow down. Um, and again, like sort of that idea of if you don't make time to slow down, if you don't make time for play or fun or relaxation, that I guess I believe that your body will force you to find that time for you, which again sort of comes up with this like feeling sick example. And again, I don't want to say that like, oh, that's your fault, right? Like, or, oh, you have way too much to do and like, that's why you got sick. Like, right. I think actions have consequences, right? This is part of what happens, but we have to figure out how to create space and how to sort of push against that tension of, again, so often what society wants us to do, which is work, 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 work for the system, do what they want. And then, maybe in like your 5 minutes a day, have some self care, right? Like that's not balance, that's not equilibrium. So we have to find ways to kind of push back against that dominant narrative that we must work before play. Again, I think sometimes that can be motivating. Sometimes that can be helpful if you tend towards not having like the physical motivation to do things. But I feel like that's also sort of the other side of the coin there. That's not something everyone struggles with. And I think oftentimes when we get upset or feel like we are being lazy, well, that's because we're actually trying to recover from being overwhelmed and overstimulated and run down. And so now rest looks like literally not moving at all because, again, like that's sort of what our body's calling us to do. Even if, right, you have grand plans to go out and run around and go do fun things and do lots of physical stuff, that can be really fun. But if we don't have capacity for that, right, if we don't make time in our lives for those nourishing things and having capacity, then we might spend all of our free time, right? All of our weekend time, all of our weeknight time, just simply trying to recover from the rest of life. And that can just be a really challenging space to be in, right? Again, I'm not saying that you can't do that for a time, right? Or, right, there are times in our life where we maybe have to push through things, or there's external situations that you don't have the capability, you don't have the support to have play in your life. But I would say, right, to me, it's a priority to try and again kind of push back against that dominant narrative that we have to just work all the time or work before you can have any fun. We have to find ways to nourish ourselves in the in between as well, and not just have one or the other, all work or all play. All right. Well, let's see. So I'm going to dive in and see what the cards have to say today on this topic. So I'm going to be thinking about, as I pull this card, where can we find equilibrium in our life? What is something that might require us to seek more balance? What's something that maybe is feeling out of equilibrium right now or unbalanced? Is there something our subconscious is trying to tell us that we need to pay attention to or need to consider before we push through with just our goals and that sort of like grounded things in our lives? So let's see. I'm going to pull from my Ophidia Rosa deck by Leela and Olive. And this is a deck that I feel like I'm still getting to know right now. It's a little bit newer to me. It's very beautiful, but it's a little more abstract looking and has short descriptions. So I'm going to go ahead and shuffle and pull a card from there. All right, so I pulled the Seven of Wands. I'm going to go ahead and read the description and then I'll sort of try to interpret what I think it means. So the phrase associated with this card is you shattered your shadows with light shared for all. You shattered your shadows with light shared for all. It kind of makes me think about, so again, in the context of sort of the in-between space or maybe things that we're needing to find equilibrium around, it kind of makes me think about that, right? Sometimes when we have our shadow selves, or right, like maybe the parts of self that are unhealed or um, traumatic or things that we've gone through in our lives, right? It's saying, okay, like you broke through those by sort of with the light shared for everyone. And maybe that's through collaboration, maybe that's through sharing your story, right? And sort of finding maybe camaraderie or again support through other people. It's saying that, right, you didn't just do this process in like in isolation, right? You didn't just, if we think about kind of the Hermit card is the idea that you, right, sort of withdraw from society and introspect, and then you bring those gifts or the downloads or whatever you've sort of realized back in and share those with others. So this is sort of saying that, right, like, okay, you worked through your shadows, you worked through that piece. When I look at this card, in particular, it gives a very like sun energy, like it looks almost like a big sunflower, right, which is sort of different from the shadow or when we think of shadow self. So it's sort of this like shattering again, if we think of like the literal process of shattering something, it's very violent, but shattering something also is a way to transform it. So this is talking about shattering those shadows, right? The things that maybe we've been troubled with in the past or that have really constricted or held us back, and that we're finding ways to, right, share that light with other people. Maybe again, that starts with ourselves and then it's sort of spreading the message. Or, right, just sort of thinking about it in a different way. Or, right, again, finding support, finding ways to sort of, I want to say like utilize, but we'll go with like transmute, transmute your challenging times or grief or other things, right? The dark parts of self or shadow into something that feels worthwhile or something that can be shared. All right. So links for the tarot decks that I talk about will always be in the show notes and on my website if you'd like to look at them or purchase them. And thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye-bye.